My colleague, Rabbi Seth Goldstein, drew a connection between the SCOTUS decision yesterday to overturn Roe and today's Parshat Shelach in a TikTok video. He's one of the TikTok rabbis. And he said, today, a minority of mostly men set the world back 50 years. Just as in this week's Parsha, a minority of the community, and yes, also all male, set back the Israelite community for 40 years, setting the stage for them to wander in the desert. And of course, it is not a perfect parallel to equate the spies appointed to go into the land with the Supreme Court justices of the United States. At the same time, there is something to this that we can explore. Both groups took their own perceptions and imposed them onto the broader community. Both groups did what was right for them and the minority without recognizing the needs and desires of the majority of people. But what I appreciate most about this analogy is that it puts us in the place of, or in the mindset of, the community of Israelites who are hearing the terrible news, as the ones who are receiving the decision and dealing with the consequences of the report that is being given by those people. Looking at the Parsha from this light, where I have often scowled at the Israelites' lack of faith, their lack of trust, this year I have never felt more sympathetic to their response to the spies' report. I have never related more to their reaction of overwhelm, of sheer dread and terror, and subsequent worst-case scenario planning than I do today. And just as in this mythic scenario generations ago, there is true reason to be afraid. And I think it's important that we be clear and explicit. The overturning of Roe will result in death. There's no way of getting around that. And even if there are exceptions for a mother's life being in danger, there are many scenarios where a mother would not qualify and would have to carry to term a life in a way that compromised her health. The overturning of Roe will result in increased economic inequality. We know from history that women who have means will get an abortion even if it's illegal. Many will journey to our state of New York, which is doing an amazing job of responding, from Texas, West Virginia, and over half of the states with an immediate or a near immediate trigger ban to have abortion bans in their states. But those without economic means will carry more unwanted babies to term, and has been well documented will negatively impact their ability to move out of generational poverty. And as we know, this will disproportionately affect communities of color. The overturning of Roe will also cause unspeakable trauma for those who are survivors of rape or incest or emotional or physical abuse. And the overturning of Roe, which goes against the desire of the majority of Americans, will have a profound psychological impact on all girls and women in America whose basic human rights were taken away yesterday, knowing that they are now second-class citizens, that their bodies are not up for grab, or not up fully on their own. And last night, I joined tens of thousands of people gathered in Union Square Park and walking from there north. And it was mostly a crowd of younger women. And I looked around and I wondered how their life will be different than the life that I had in my 20s and my 30s. And perhaps most significantly, or it's hard to really measure what's most significant, the overturning of Roe opens a door for a host of potential Supreme Court decisions that negatively impact women and queer people. So on this day of Pride, we are also thinking about the potential threat to gay marriage and even just basic gay rights. And this was very explicit in the concurring opinion of Justice Thomas. Looking at the Torah text from this perspective, perhaps the Israelites in the desert with their fits of panic, their attempts to gather all of their meager belongings and head back in the direction of Egypt were not so off base after all. But as the Israelites soon realized, and as we also know in our hearts, the panic and dread in our response ultimately does not serve us. It may provide temporary relief and release, but it does not propel us forward. We have to move beyond grief towards positive action, which is perhaps why the Torah portion, which is so dramatic and intense, concludes with the section that we read today, with this list of positive commands for the people to do when they're in the desert and also when the next generation encounters the land, culminating in the mitzvah of tzitzit, the commandment of commandments. When we look at tzitzit, we're supposed to remember all 613 commandments. We're supposed to remember to act in a positive way in the world, to do mitzvot. Additionally, we are invited, after the dread and after the panic and after the freaking out, to work to right the wrongs that have been created by a powerful minority voice. And I want to end my remarks with a teaching based on this Torah portion that I think is absolutely, really incredible. And maybe if there's time, I'll have a few comments after. But in the Talmud, the rabbis are talking about the concept minyan, the concept of 10 people, 10 Jews that need to gather in order to create a prayer community. Where is the source of that 10? It's clear that they already have been practicing 10, so they're debating the source of that 10. And if you think about it, there are many sources that they could draw on. Most poignantly, the 10 righteous people that Abraham argued for in the fight over Sodom and Gomorrah, even though they never manifested the idea that there would be 10 righteous people, would be a really wonderful justification for the concept of minyan. But instead, the rabbis of the Talmud say that this idea of minyan derives from the spies. That derives from the spies, the 10 spies. The 10 spies who spread Lashon Hara, who spread, slander, as our tradition teaches. The 10 spies that deny God's vision and God's ability to help them get into the promised land. Those are deemed, according to our tradition, as an evil congregation. And this is the basis of the idea of minyan, this evil congregation. So this is very counterintuitive. Why would we draw a positive commandment from such a negative act? And I want to argue that it is precisely because of their sin. Tradition recognizes that groups of people can do terrible things. They can create unholy congregations. They can create communities that are negative and fearful. And precisely because human beings are capable of doing that, and perhaps this is even the way of the world, this is why when we constitute a minyan, we are purposely trying to counter that natural impulse. We are redirecting people to a holy, sacred purpose, to the service of something higher than the individual needs. And so if we take that teaching that way, every time that we constitute a minyan, a holy community, That is an opportunity for a tikkun, a healing, a reconciliation of the action of the spies. We are bringing more goodness into the world instead of the potential for evil. The concept of minyan is traditionally associated with prayer, but I think we can interpret this beautiful Torah even more broadly. In the face of groups who exert their authority and go against the will of the people, we create minyan. We seek to gather in ways that ennoble us and serve the holy. Thinking about yesterday and still kind of sorting out my own response and reaction, I want to be clear that there's no doubt that this is a devastating blow and this is a frightening moment, especially because of all that it could open up. And it's going to be a long fight. For those who weren't able to join anything yesterday, this is a multi-year process of fighting for rights and doing it in our own way. But we remember that when we gather in prayer, when we gather in protest, we find the strength to move forward, to create that sacred container, to bring about a different vision of community and mutual obligation, to right the wrongs of the 10 spies and all of those who seek to do evil and harm. We form and keep forming those communities of holiness and sacredness. So that is the work. It's just beginning. We can be afraid, but as Rabbi Nachman taught, the world is a very narrow bridge. We might be afraid, but we walk through that bridge anyway. And may we have strength and courage, and let us say, Amen. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.